me start my video so you can all put a face to a voice, and I will share my screen as well. Good stuff. So for the next half an hour, as Ray mentioned, we'll be focusing on a sort of marketer's guide to privacy consent and more broadly personalization in the modern privacy era that we find ourselves in. Just very quickly to introduce myself, my name's Zachary Faruque. I'm an offering manager here at OneTrust. I'm both a certified information privacy professional for Europe, as well as a certified information privacy manager as well. Both of those qualifications through the IAPP. Quick look at the agenda. We'll have a look at the evolving landscape and see what's sort of driving the shift in consumer expectations. We'll also do a bit of a focus on cookies then, because I know that's a hot topic. Look at consent more broadly within the marketing communications, first party data, and then do somewhat of a wrap up and hopefully have time for a Q&A as well. So as Ray mentioned, please do put your questions in the chat. These sessions are always more fun if we can keep them interactive. So let's get cracking on the evolving landscape. And I think really the first thing to call out is that what we see today is that trust is a competitive differentiator for brands. I saw a crazy stat the other day. I think it was something like 45% of all of those users that transfer from Android or from Apple, from Google to Apple and iOS do so for privacy reasons. That's a pretty incredible number. And we know that Apple very heavily leans on this from a marketing standpoint as well. What's sort of driven this though, and what's got us to this place? I think, first and foremost, there's no hiding from the regulations. Really, we probably saw a big shift in the e-privacy directive that came out from the EU first, more commonly known as the cookies law, but then the behemoth that was GDPR. And of course, we've seen a sort of avalanche since then. The CCPA, CPRA, which is CCPA 2.0, has already been legislated, although not coming in until 2023. LGPD in Brazil, you've got the Canada anti-spam legislation, POPIA in South Africa. You could pretty much pick any 4 letters, any acronym, and I'm pretty sure there is a regulation out there somewhere, either in full swing today or incoming. On top of that, though, we also see frameworks and guidelines that are there to support brands in addressing these regulations. If there are any publishers on the call, I'm sure you're all aware of the IAB's Transparency and Consent Framework, for better or for worse. But we also see, technology companies specifically going way beyond these regulations. I know iOS 14 is a hot topic, and I won't touch on it too much because I know Lena's going to cover that a little bit later. And the effects on the IDFA, the ID for advertisers, but we're also seeing things like the deprecation of third-party cookies. That's not a regulatory requirement that's driving that. That is browsers wanting to protect the privacy of their consumers and users. Now, all of these things, these 3 things put together, also, of course, end up in a much greater and higher media coverage. And that's not just media coverage in around headlines of data breaches, but it's also media coverage in things like The Social Dilemma. I don't know if anyone on this call's watched that. Very, very interesting program that's on Netflix. But it's making us much more aware as consumers about our data, our rights with that data, and our concerns, the concerns we should have around the privacy and security of that data. So what does that mean we see from a sort of board level perspective? I think if we go back to the sort of late 90s, very early 2000s, it was all about how much bang am I getting for my buck? It was really about price and quality. But then we saw customer experience become a big player in the brands that we chose to work with, and obviously those personalized engagements. What we're seeing from the 2020s on, though, from a board level perspective, is a much greater focus in and around trust and transparency. So it's not that experience or engagement or price or quality don't matter anymore, but on top of that, the differentiators become trust and transparency. And you can see a stat there from Edelman, where 70% of consumers say trusting a brand is more important today than ever. And I'm sure that there wouldn't be any disagreements on this call in regards to that only increasing with time. So what is the sort of takeaway from this? I think if I was to boil it down, when we're making decisions as a business on our strategies or our engagements with customers, we need to give ourselves some really simple guiding principles. And I was on a webinar with Harry Decker, who's media director at Unilever, a couple of weeks ago, and he said something really interesting. At Unilever, they have two questions that they ask themselves before they make any decisions from a marketing perspective. The first is, would I do this with my mother's data? And the second one being, how would I explain this to the 9 o'clock news? Those two guiding principles are enough to make sure that the decisions that we make are going to be in the best interests of our consumers and ensure that as brands, we're trusted and we're trusted with our customers' data. So a really great takeaway there from Harry. Okay, let's jump into cookies now. Really, I suppose the first thing to think about in regards to cookies is that the big driver was, of course, the privacy directive. Something definitely to watch out for is the e-privacy regulation. It's been flying around the EU for quite a while now, but we're expecting to see movement on this in the next year or two. One of the questions we commonly get asked as well is, do I need to get consent for all types of cookies? Now, the reality is there are differing opinions and differing guidance from the different supervisory authorities in Europe. The best way to think about it and to ensure that you're compliant is that if a cookie is not strictly necessary, i.e. not needed for the functioning of the website, then you need to gain consent, and that consent has to be opt-in consent, which means a clear affirmative action, no pre-ticked checkboxes. And there's a great example here from Adobe where we can see that those core services and strictly necessary cookies are always active, but then we are given a choice in regards to the other types of cookies. I think one of the things that Adobe have done well is that they've tried to use language that is on brand and part of their tone of voice. It's not strictly necessary cookies, targeting cookies. They're trying to explain what those cookies are actually being used for. So when you're implementing your banners, if you already have banners implemented, go back, have a look and double check that those banners are an extension of your tone of voice. And it doesn't look like that the first thing you're saying when an individual comes to your website, speak to my lawyer before you speak to me, because none of us want to be in that situation. Just to give you some extra guidance on this as well, there is a lot you can do with your cookie banner. And I mentioned there keeping it in your tone of voice, but you can also look at going even further and looking at gamification if you want to as well. A really nice example here, if you are a coffee shop, why not have a latte that increases with the more cookies that the user agrees to. So make it fun and make it on brand is really the message here. The other thing to think about that we see a lot less often is that a cookie or getting consent for cookies does not need to be in this massive banner that takes up the full screen. You can capture consent contextually. And that contextual consent is really important because you can see much higher opt-in rates, because as consumers, we can more easily understand what we're actually consenting to. So in this example, maybe you're a publisher, you have content on your site. Why not let people know that if they want to see more content like that in an automated fashion, then they'll need to give consent to personalization cookies in order for us to track and understand what consent they enjoy consuming. The other thing to think about with your cookie banners as a bit of guidance is that A/B testing works and you should be doing it. If you care about your opt-ins and want to increase your opt-in rates, then A/B testing is a great way of going about this. If you're working with a third-party vendor, find out if they support A/B testing because it is extremely important. DHL released a fantastic blog where they went through their strategy and they actually did a two-phased approach for A/B testing. but they saw analytics cookie specifically analytics cookie opt-in rates go from something like 30% to 70%. So it absolutely works, and it should be something that you're considering from a cookie perspective. Moving on from cookies though, one of the other key topics is always in and around marketing communications. Again, specifically within Europe, something that we need consent for as brands. And really the first piece of advice that I would give is that make sure you're keeping it very, very simple. If you try and capture too much at once, we all know the number of form fields, as the number of form fields increases, so does the increase in dropout rates, because people get fatigued and they don't want to go through so many options. So keep it very simple. It also doesn't have to be a checkbox. It just needs to be a clear affirmative action, and you need to be able to show that the consumer can very clearly understand what they're signing up to and what they're consenting to when they do that action. And so having a newsletter box where I can simply put in my email address and hit submit is a great way of doing that. And I'm able to do that potentially without even, without even doing a registration or going through a wider process. So at point of collection, really the takeaway here is just keep it simple and keep it contextual. Now, the other thing to think about, and is a big concern, because marketers saw their subscription and distribution lists decimated by these new links that were introduced that had to go in the bottom of emails. Every marketing email we send out now should have an unsubscribe or a manage preferences. And this is really where, rather than just thinking about consent, we can expand on this and think about preferences, providing personalization options to our consumers. So instead of having a nuclear unsubscribe button, which is basically you can contact me or you can't contact me, think about how you can categorize those communications and create campaigns that are more personalized and tailored to your different types of customers. So moving from unsubscribe to manage my communication preferences. And instead of just that nuclear option, give users a choice. Maybe there are specific product preferences. Maybe there are specific channels, even frequency of communications. And you can go as granular as you'd like. Maybe if for hoteliers or the hospitality industry, you could give someone the option to say exactly when. I personally sometimes like a spontaneous getaway on a weekend. So on a Friday lunchtime, I might, look through some offers for hotels, certainly outside of COVID era, of course. But if there's a good offer, then maybe myself and my partner go away for that weekend. So that personalization is, and the ability to manage those communication preferences mean instead of opting out, instead of having that nuclear button, I'm going to opt down, because ultimately I am a customer of a given brand for a reason. They have my email address for a reason. I want to engage with that brand. So if I'm feeling like I need to opt out, I'm also doing that for a reason. And it might just be the frequency of communications. It might be that I only care about one specific product. If we think about banking industry, maybe I only care about credit cards at the moment, or I only care about mortgages at the moment, or savings accounts. And so by allowing me to tailor those communications, instead of just opting out of everything, I ensure that I'm receiving the communications that I want. And that, of course, is driving increased loyalty and increased conversions on our campaigns from a business standpoint. So always think about preferences rather than consent, or instead of just consent when we're thinking about marketing communications. The other piece I wanted to touch on, because again, this is a very hot topic at the moment, and that is first-party data capture. One of the key reasons for this being a hot topic is because of the deprecation of third-party cookies. Obviously, there is a massive impact to the ad tech ecosystem that relies very heavily on third-party cookies for identification and capturing of information of individuals. But that applies to advertisers also. And so when we think about wanting to have experiences and create personalized experiences with our consumers in a transparent and trustworthy manner, the best way we can possibly do that is to capture data direct from that individual. And so this is where first-party data comes in. Really, the best advice that we can give and what we see those customers that are innovating and leading the charge at the moment really do four key things really well in regards to first-party data. First and foremost, they have an identifier. Of course, without an identifier, we don't have the ability to store, data or preferences against that individual. Then they do something which I think could definitely do with a rebrand, and that's called progressive profiling. Now, profiling by its very nature sounds like hashtag creepy, but the reality is it's the opposite, and it's hashtag don't be creepy. It's about mapping out your touch points and everywhere that your consumer interacts with your brand, whether that be in the mobile app, point of sale in bricks and mortars, your website, for publishers, maybe even OTT, CTV space. It's about understanding all of those different touch points and then capturing data in a contextual manner at those different touch points. So it's the right data at the right time. It's not a 100 field form that we're trying to capture everything at once, but it's capturing that data in a contextual manner. And then, of course, it's making sure that we act on that data as soon as we have it. If someone lets us know a specific preference, we instantly get them in real time into that nurture campaign that we may have going on. If we look specifically at identity first, because ultimately it is the key to everything, one of the key pieces to identity is about, or increasing the number of registrations you have, it's about showing and providing a value exchange to the individual. So some examples here: Bed Bath & Beyond offer a discount in pricing if you register. Lululemon provides you with a virtual assistant if you register. And then Joss & Main, which is a Wayfair company, an example here, where they push you towards the app to register, and they do that based on an extra features that you will receive. If you purchase a vase, you're able to take a photo and see exactly what that vase would look like in the space, in your personal space. So some ideas here about that value exchange, but it's a great way of increasing the number of registrations you have. And of course, once you have those registrations, it becomes much easier to then start capturing wider first-party data to tie against that. It's not just about identity where that value exchange is important, though. Another great example is if we want to capture date of birth from our customers. And that's useful for us for a variety of reasons, including demographics and segmenting and understanding who's buying our products and using them. But again, you can still offer value exchange here. So why not offer a birthday gift and be really clear about that? So if you have a field for a date of birth, why not have a why do we capture? Why do we want your date of birth? And let them know that you're going to receive a £5 gift or a 10% discount on your birthday every year. I mean, it's great for us. It means that we can, market to them. We can market them specifically on their birthday. We can give them that 10% discount. And of course, in order to get that 10% discount, they need to make a purchase. So think about what value exchanges you can make, but also think about keeping it simple and keeping it contextual, so consumers understand why they're providing that information, and you'll see much higher conversion rates and capture rates there. So from an opportunity for marketers specifically perspective, what should you be thinking about and doing, moving forwards and encompassing in your strategy in 2021? The first thing I would say is get involved. What you don't want is your lawyers talking to your customers. When that is happening, something's gone very, very wrong. So don't enforce that as our first point of contact. Our first interaction with our customers is speak to my lawyer. Make sure you're getting involved and take ownership and get involved in privacy notices, privacy policies, all of those pieces where you're talking, their interactions with your customers, marketers should be a key piece in that. make sure that you're including preference management in your strategy if you aren't already. You may well already be capturing consent because the Privacy Office has enforced it. Again, try and take ownership of that and look at how you can jump on the opportunity of personalization with that consent. And then the final thing I would say, and this is probably more of a longer term piece, but again, where we're seeing those innovators in the industry are moving towards a wider privacy center or trust center. And that is, all about taking some of the wider pieces of the privacy regulations. So not just consent or cookie consent, also looking at things like data subject access requests. Quite often they're serviced by the marketing team, the customer care teams. So data subject access requests, privacy policies, again, all of those regulatory pieces that are consumer facing, and putting those into a single trust center, privacy center, portal, whatever you'd like to call it, where an individual can very quickly see and manage all of those pieces. So just very quickly about Preference Choice and who we are. Preference Choice is an offering that sits within the wider OneTrust team. And really it's built specifically for marketers. And it's about ensuring that that compliance piece is automated and giving you the tools as marketers to still be able to do what you need to do, to build those personalized engagements, to capture data from your customers, to be able to sync and pass that data to third parties where you need to. And being able to do that with the compliance piece automated so that you can sleep easy at night. You're not going to appear in the headlines the next day because of some form of breach of trust, ultimately, with your customers. And one vanity slide, if I may, Coopin Chacol recently released a report on privacy and consent management, their leadership compass, as they call it. And we were the only vendor to earn the highest designation of strong positive. So we were extremely proud of that. And I think we're just at the 25-minute mark, so I will stop there, say thank you very much, and open up to any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much indeed, Zach. We have actually, I'll start with Laura's. I've had a couple more come through private as well, but we'll start with Laura's. She said that you've discussed using a preference center and what your thoughts are on breaking preferences down based on the type of content available in the communication, i.e. webinars, case studies, etc.
Yes, absolutely. I think the key piece is understanding what interactions are right for your brand and what that split out is. And so if you look at all of your current marketing communications or all of your email communications, and maybe the first sift is between those transactional ones that are just needed, it's a receipt being sent or something, in which case we don't need to worry about it. And those emails that really are marketing communications, and then setting a taxonomy. So how can we break these down? Sometimes it makes sense to break them down by product or product type. Sometimes it makes sense to break them down into certain categorizations. So for instance, within the pharma industry, it might be, educational emails. Emails, if I'm looking at a specific drug website, do I want to hear about, what that drug does and how it does it? Do I want to hear about the disease itself that drug is maybe assigning? Do I want to hear about the financial aspect? So it's really just figuring out what's right for your business and going through that taxonomy journey.
Super, thanks, Zach. Also, you mentioned earlier on the deprecation of third-party cookies. You touched on those changes. What's the specific impact going to be on consumers and advertisers alike? Can you broaden out on that a little bit?
Yeah, so from a consumer perspective, it's great news. It means we're not going to be tracked without our knowledge, because that's ultimately what third-party cookies do. And the technology itself can be used for some really, useful and important pieces. But the reality is having that technology there allows, nefarious companies to do it in a nefarious way and ultimately track everything we do everywhere. So I think from a consumer impact, that's fantastic. From an advertiser's impact, they're going to lose access to a lot of data. So third-party cookies, and I know Facebook are following up, so I apologize, Lena, if I cause any offense. You know, companies like Facebook that are on every website, their third-party cookies can capture ultimately everything you do on that site. And they know that you go from one site to another site. Now, when third-party cookies get removed, that ability goes away. So the identifier that's tracking us and the ability to track, maybe we go to Alcoholics Anonymous and suddenly we get put in a group of, of consumes alcohol, and now suddenly we're getting adverts from Bacardi or whatever it happens to be. I mean, that's a very cynical example, so apologies, and in no way am I suggesting Facebook or any part of that. But so as advertisers, it's going to be much harder for us to say, I want to target this specific demographic with my ads, and then have our DMP go off and do that for us. So by capturing the data ourselves, it becomes much more powerful.
So a reduced opportunity to do personalization then from an advertiser's perspective, because they're not able to amass that sort of intelligence about that individual?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I think we'll potentially see an increase in direct publisher advertiser relationships as well as
yeah. And do you think there's a fear from enterprise that over transparency of regulation and options to opt in and opt out of different facets of permissions on their sites and their apps, etc., will drive the consumer away the more transparent they're being about what they're going to do with the data? Do you think that a lot of advertisers are doing the bare minimum to make sure they hold on to that consumer?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately about how you present it to your consumer, and it's one of my bugbears. The first thing that you see on every website is a massive cookie banner, because I want to start tracking you before you've even decided whether you want to spend any time on our website, whether you like any of the content. Yeah. So I don't think the issue is about transparency or regulation. I think the issue is, how do we embrace this and make sure that we're not putting our lawyer in the front of the conversation.
It's funny, Marcus Williams has just pinged up a question there. He says that was a very interesting example. He said there's an alcohol company, a beer company, that directly mails him free beer, and he's not drunk alcohol for 11 years. So he tweeted them to ask them why he's targeting me. So I don't know, maybe somebody's using your computer, Marcus, who does like a drink. I don't know, but any response to that? You may have seen that pop up.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Another example, a few months ago, I decided that I wanted to ask my partner to marry me. But in the COVID era, I have no way of going to a shop and, go to a jeweler and start looking at rings and all of that. I have to do it online. It's my only choice. But the worry is that, I spend some time during the day searching for engagement rings. My other half comes home at the end of her workday and she gets spammed with ads for engagement rings. So one of the most important times in our lives is being ruined because brands are doing this nefarious piece of, and it's not just third-party cookies, things like fingerprinting. I'm going to check what fonts you've got on your system and your screen size. I'm going to use all of that so that I can give you an identifier. I mean, it's horrific, but that doesn't mean I didn't want a personalized experience. Yeah. So the first thing I did was check everyone's cookie banners and what cookies are they dropping, and being sure, because I have the knowledge. But how many people don't have that knowledge and have ultimately had their engagement secretly ruined because the other half has seen all of the spam adverts?
I heard a similar story about Target a number of years ago, with a young lady who used her dad's loyalty card in Target and bought pregnancy-based products, and they congratulated her via him on her being pregnant, and he didn't even know at the time. So there are the pitfalls, obviously. Zach, thank you very much indeed. Zachary